Hello, welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I am Renee Allen, the host of this podcast, and I'm excited to be here today. Today, I want to talk about working memory a bit. We've talked about, or I have talked about working memory before, but I want to explore it a little bit more and see how understanding what it is can help us in figuring out the way that we should do things in a more helpful way, more productive way, or more efficient way without going crazy. Because there are highs and lows, ups and downs with ADHD. There are times when we function really well, and there are times when we don't. And understanding what's going on with our brains is useful information. And even just looking at yourself and when you've done well with something and when you haven't, using that information with your experience can help you see, how does this work for me? Most of us aren't going to get brain scans or have a clear picture of exactly what's going on. Oh, you have this much shortage of dopamine, or you have that much whatever in our version of ADHD, but we can look to our experiences and see that works for me, that doesn't. I knew at some point, probably not as a child. I mean, maybe I was just doing survival mode stuff, but as I got older, I realized that I didn't like board games that much because it was so frustrating to figure out what the rules were, especially if it was a game that somebody else knew really well and they were sharing it with me and they were saying, okay, this is how you play. And they tell me all the things. And I can't keep them all straight in my head. They're not in my head. And that's because working memory doesn't work as well for me. And so I can't put that in my brain and keep a little running list and know how to do it unless I rehearse it, unless I see it with my eyes, unless I play it a few times, I experience it. And even then, unless I'm playing that game consistently, I'd probably come back to it 6 months later, a year later, a month later, and say, now, wait, what do we do with this? Because it's really not in that deep. I was barely holding on to that memory of what we're supposed to do. And I'm realizing that this is just a small example of a lot of things that happen in my life, of why some things are easier for me to do and some things are a lot harder. And I hope that you can think about this for yourself as I talk about working memory and figure out, how do things make sense for you? How are you able to get that memory stored? When does it work for you? When doesn't it? There are different ways that we can bring in information. And one is by hearing it. One is by seeing it. One is kind of calculating it or organizing it within our heads. Maybe finding some way to remember it. Like if you have a password for your computer now, thankfully, Google and Apple, maybe there are other tools too, they store our passwords for us. But sometimes we forget to click for it to store, for whatever reason it doesn't. Are you choosing something that you might be able to remember later? In the early days of passwords, maybe so, but now we have hundreds. I swear we have hundreds of passwords. And then they say, do you want a passkey? Or do you want this? Or let's send it to your phone. And you're thinking, I don't even know where my phone is. It makes it harder to function. But let's say in the olden days of passwords, you see the name of Zappos. You're going to order a pair of shoes and you have to have a password. Maybe you think of a word like zoo. Z is like Zappos, and zoo. What animal do I like at the zoo that starts with a Z? A zebra. Whatever. You make a little story in your brain, or you assign a memory to a number. Let's say you have a number at the end of a password. Oh, that was the age that I got married, or that was the year that I graduated from high school. You might have some of these associations or little tricks or something that help you remember. Because if you're just going off of pure, I'll store this in here. I have a photographic memory. If I see it, I'll remember it. Not many of us have that to begin with. And if you have executive dysfunction, then it's even more of a challenge. And I look at it as digesting the information. We're not just tasting it. We might taste it and spit it out. We might taste it and not realize that we didn't digest it. It just, I don't want to say it passed right through us. Maybe it didn't even pass through us. It just went away. But are you digesting the information? Because any experience that you have is information coming into your brain, or anything that you're hearing or seeing. It's coming in, but not all of it stays there. And I've heard before people say, well, you remember what you pay attention to. Yes and no. I mean, true, I might be in a situation and I remember what shoes somebody was wearing, or somebody else doesn't remember that because they didn't look and see the shoes. They didn't pay attention to the shoes. They didn't think, oh, those shoes are cute. I wonder where she got them. You add more thought to it, and then you might remember that. And it's just so interesting how we all store information so differently, or we pay attention to different things. I find it fascinating going to family reunions or class reunions and comparing memories. And people say, I remember this. And some of it you think 100%, I remember that. You share that memory. Other times you think, oh, I don't remember that at all. Or you remember it down to what people were wearing, what they exactly said, where you were standing in the schoolyard when that happened. And they look at you like, oh my goodness, how do you remember all of that? I do have a long-term memory, and long-term is not just 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It can even be last week. But I do have that deep, deep long-term memory for a lot of things, but not everything. And is it because of what I paid attention to? Is it because I savored that experience? Is it because I saw pictures of that Easter when my mom made us all matching clothes? And I saw those pictures enough times that that memory didn't leave. That could play a part. It's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Especially when we're not someone who deep studies this. We didn't go to college for it. We didn't master in it, get a doctorate in it. But we still can be curious about it. And we can still figure out for ourselves how we process information, what helps it stay there, and what might not work at all. There are also different levels of understanding information as it comes to us. So somebody may say, my name is Brenda, and we understand that. We know how to say Brenda. We know somebody else named Brenda. It's not a name that we haven't heard before. That might be easy to understand, that word, and that person's telling you their name. But unless you find a way to process it and put it in your mind, you're not going to remember it unless you're really good with names. But the older we get, at least I found when I was in my 40s, I stopped remembering the moms' names at school, my kids' friends. I forgot their names. And so I'd have to call them Cooper's mom or Aiden's mom. And I would actually put them in my phone as the real name and then in parentheses, Cooper's mom or Aiden's mom. And I still have probably 20 or 30 contacts like that because I haven't changed them. But that's what helped me. And then I got to a point where I wasn't even remembering whose mom they were. It took me a while to put that together. So I do think getting older, I don't know, maybe perimenopause, menopause, those years play a part in not remembering that stuff or not recalling it as much. But that's not complex information. It's a name. It's a name. And it gets a little more complex if it's a name we haven't heard of or we don't know how to pronounce. Or if you don't hear very well. That's me. I don't hear very well. So are you saying Kira or Thera? So I have to know that. And then when I first met my friend Thera, I had never heard of that name. My hearing was bad. So I asked her how to spell it. And I do that with a lot of names. I say, how do you spell your name? Not so I know how to spell it when I text them or something, but because if I see it, I'm more of a visual processor than an audio processor, which is super interesting because I love listening to audiobooks now over reading books. But I don't remember what I hear when I'm listening to an audiobook unless I listen to it multiple times. And so what happens is I think, oh, I'll just read this audiobook or listen to this audiobook. But then if it's a factual book, it's a book with information, not a novel, not fiction. And I want to remember that. I want to remember the quote. I want to understand the idea better. Then I need to actually buy the physical book because I can open it up as a resource and see that and maybe make some notes or something, put a bookmark in it and have that handy because I want to absorb that information and I won't do it from hearing it. So as you listen to this, do you recognize that you have one way or the other, or it's complex, it's multifaceted? So that's just information that we can get pretty easily. We can understand it, we can comprehend it, but we may not be able to remember it. And then there's other information that I can't wrap my head around it. I don't understand the system. That's how I always have been with sewing. There's a whole system to how you sew something inside out and then how far away you're sewing from the edge. And a lot of that I questioned because I don't know, I just have that nature that I think, I don't want to do it that way. It's probably that overwhelm, but I question it and I don't understand the system. And so I don't do all the steps. I do that a lot with cooking and things don't turn out that well unless it really doesn't matter. I feel like baking. I've made my share of cookies and bread that I can do things my own way. And a lot of times they do turn out because I think I'm not going to refrigerate that dough for an hour. I'm not going to put that in first. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do it in the order, separate the dry ingredients from the wet ingredients. There are some things I just don't have the patience for, and who knows why. It's probably part of the ADHD brain. But if you can't wrap your head around doing something, that might lead to some overwhelm. And you're definitely not going to store the information in there. And so sometimes really sitting down, separating yourself from other things that are going on and saying, okay, I need to learn this. I want to learn to do this. I'm going to find the answers on YouTube or just written out. I don't like to hear them on YouTube unless they have them written out below because I won't remember it. They're saying it in the air. It's something I'm hearing. Maybe I like to see the technique that they're using, but I really need a written list. And I wish the internet people would figure that out, that not everybody can just hear everything on YouTube. We don't all want YouTube links. Sometimes we want a list. We want steps so that our brain can make sense of the steps. Wrap your head around, oh, that's how it works. I'm playing the game, sorry, and I'm trying to go from here around the board or backwards 4 and then up. Once you know the whole story of that board game, then you've got it. You might forget a few things, is the 2 the one that you can go backwards or 1 or 4? But you have an overall understanding of that system, of the way it works. And once you have either the understanding because it's something clear, it's a name you know how to spell, you understand what they're saying, or you've heard all this information and you think, yeah, this can make sense for me. Do you need to even do more to help you remember? Probably. Because the information, even though we understand it, won't go in there and stay. Very likely it won't go in there and stay. So without thinking, what are some things I could do that could help this information stay? Think for think for a second about yourself, of what you already do that works. Do you write Post-it notes to help you remember something? Do you say it out loud over and over when you're walking from one room to another room so you won't forget why you went into that other room, or you won't forget that you were cooking in the room that you left? Do you have little methods already that help you? And my guess is for many of you, especially if you're like me and you were diagnosed in adulthood, far into adulthood, I don't know how far, I don't know how long I'm living, but quite a bit into adulthood, you probably had to do some of these things already. Write it on the calendar, write yourself a Post-it note. I figured out that that Post-it note had to be written in a Sharpie or I wouldn't see it. early on when I had so many yoga classes I was teaching, and they weren't always on the same days and they weren't always at the same time because I taught firefighters and that changed by shift and location. And I had to have a Post-it note that was just where I'd see it when I walked through the kitchen, where I'd see it when I went here to different parts of the house. So as I walked around, it would trigger my brain. It would trigger my brain. Because well, that was before I set alarms on my phone, but I didn't always have my phone with me. Now I have an Apple Watch and that can give me an alarm, but what if I don't feel like wearing my watch that day? So there's always some methods there's always methods that we use that aren't foolproof, and that can be hard. But looking at what you do that works or that's worked before, maybe that will spark some ideas for other areas where it's not working, or give you an idea for a new tool that might even work better, or in addition to what you're already doing. Sometimes we need multiple things to help us remember. With remembering names, and I know this is not important to everyone. Not everyone cares if they remember someone's name. It matters a lot to me if I know someone's name, and it doesn't mean I always do, but I try. And teaching yoga, so many people come in to my classes, the in-person classes, and I get to where I don't even remember, is that the same 23-year-old college student with long brown hair? I don't always remember. So it helps me to go talk to them. It helps me to ask their name. It helps me to write down their name afterwards. And sometimes I think that's not important. But if I have a notebook and I write down, like there was a group of probably 3 or 4 women that are older than I am that started coming to my classes early on. And I wrote their names down in a notebook afterwards and wrote something about each one, just something. She was the taller one. She was this. And I thought, I'm not going to need that. I'm going to remember. They were the only ones here today. And I found I totally needed it. I forgot by the end of the day, probably even earlier than that. And so notes can be helpful if you can find your notes. The most helpful for me is if I can find them on social media, and you can't always do that when you meet people. But if you can find them on social media, you have their name and their face right there. That is so helpful to have a visual of the word and a visual of the face. Name tags are great. I love it when people wear name tags because I can have that visual, but on social media, you can go back to it again and again. And then you can also learn something else about them. Oh, she lives on a big ranch and she has horses, and you see that, and that helps you build a different picture with that person. It also helps me if that person is ever wanting to contact me or get my cell phone number, or we're going to text each other about something. I will hand them my phone and say, go ahead and just write your name and number in here, because I don't always remember their names. And I don't always know how to spell it for sure, but that is so helpful. There have been some women in some of my classes that have come for a long time, but they all started coming at the same time. And the ones who check in with the app all the time, I see their names, I see their face. I think, okay, that's that person, because she'll even say, oh, I signed in. Oh, thank you for signing in. But they don't have to sign in. So the ones that I've forgotten their names at this point, I've known them for a long time. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember your name, but if we're finding out about something like she's having a garage sale, and I say, oh, text me your address so I can come to it. Here's my phone. Instead of giving them my number to put in their phone, I hand them my phone and say, go ahead and put it on there. And I've got it. I can even write a note about it in my contacts about who that person is. Oh, she's from this class. And it helps me a lot. So any way that you can get visual, audio, and you have access to it later is super, super helpful. But what about the more complex things? What about the harder to wrap your head around things? The information that you want to process that might be newer to you, have more steps that you haven't wrapped your head around. How does this work? It takes a lot of time, focus, ability to make sure that you're processing it and that you can remember it. So it really takes a whole system to be able to grasp doing those things. And I think that's why a lot of us have overwhelm. Overwhelm can be for other reasons too. It could be things we know how to do, actually. But sometimes it just comes from, I don't even know where to begin, because we don't know where to begin. We don't have that information in our brain And we have to put all those steps, we have to process all those steps to figure out how to do it. And it's interesting because a lot of us that are learning about ADHD know that it's a problem with executive functioning. It's executive dysfunction. And what that means is we have decisions to make, we have information to process. We have to figure out how to do something step by step by step by step instead of automatically. So there's automatic processing. There's, I know how to do this. I've done it many times. I'm just going to walk in here and brush my teeth. I know how to do that. Not a problem. That's an automatic function. And we don't have to think about it. It's so much easier on our brain. And 80 to 90% of what our activities are each day, this is what psychologists, experts say, 80 to 90% of that is done automatically. Our brain has this automatic system, that curve, it's this learning curve, this pattern that develops in the brain to make it so that we can do something over and over and over. When it's a steeper learning curve, it may be harder to get that automatic system set up. And if we have to do something for the first time, or we haven't done it very many times, or we don't really understand how to do it, that is an executive system in the brain. And it takes purposeful thinking effort instead of automatic effort. And it can be exhausting. So that's why we like to have systems. That's why we like to have routines. That's why it's nice to already know how to do something. But there are some things that we might want to learn to do, or we might need to paint a bathroom and we don't know how to do it on this kind of a wall, or, even though it might be something that you've been interested in doing before, it might be something new, and it takes a lot more effort. It takes a lot more effort in the brain. So do you have a way of doing that besides setting aside time, besides having, mental space, like whether you're doing something on the computer and you go to a coffee shop so you can just sit there without anything at home invading your to-do list, distracting you in that way, or it's just being at home alone or in an office alone or in a library. Having alone time might help because other distractions aren't coming in from the outside, hopefully. We always have our inner distractions, our own brains. But you may have that kind of system. I need this. I need my kitchen to be clean before I can cook something new. You might have that, let's clear things out. But do you also have a way that you process it the best and a way to organize it? And I've probably mentioned before, I love using Google Docs to just write things out, to be able to put dates or times or years to organize my memory that's not there anymore of where I lived when. Why that matters to me, I don't know, but my brain's a little clearer when I have that at my fingertips. And as I'm learning different tech things to do this online work that I'm doing with ADHD, there are so many new systems to learn. And I was taking an online course. Well, I am taking an online course, but I was watching the videos yesterday. And all the videos were really short. They were like 6 to 10 minutes or something. And sometimes I'd just listen and get other things done. Sometimes I'd take a few notes. But in one of them, he talked about knowing what your lead domino is. And I thought, what is that? What's the lead domino? I've since learned that it's actually a method that people with ADHD use. So go figure. I learned something new about ADHD. I mean, I'm learning every day for sure. But I found, before I even realized that, I just found, wow, you think like I do. You process things like I do. And he was talking about when you have a system of work that you need to do, and his was all tech work and, producing a blog or a podcast, or he does a lot more software development and stuff like that. But he said, what is your lead domino? What is the one thing that you need to do so that everything else will go more smoothly? So it was a little different than, well, it's kind of like it, but it's different than setting up a system or paving a path so that every time it becomes automatic. You'll still be doing new things, but it's more like if I want to be able to focus on cooking, it's better if my whole kitchen's clean. That's my lead domino, is starting with a clean kitchen and having the ingredients there, which probably everyone would think that, but sometimes I try to cook without the ingredients and without being even that organized. So I guess there's a couple of dominoes there, but with this, he was talking about content gathering. So if I were to write a blog post or deciding what to make a podcast about, or I was going to do some public speech. Anytime that I've done public speaking before, I've known that I just need bullet points. I just need they can be written out. They don't need to be typed up, printed out, or anything. I could take junk mail that comes and it's just on the counter, right on the back of that envelope because it's soft. I like to write on soft paper and just write out some bullet points, kind of see the organization and maybe add a few stories that'll go with it. And I'm ready to go. And I can speak so much more easily when I just have that than I can if I've written out a whole speech and bring 5, 10, however many pages with me. Anytime that I've tried to type something out, I end up just crossing things out, and just writing a little kind of a bullet point note to myself and maybe just circling some quotes that I have in there because that's just distracting to me. My brain needs it clear cut. I need to have a pathway to the clear brain so I could even get started. And so that was really interesting that he said he would either just write out some bullet points or he would make a slide presentation because even just having one little rectangle with a headline or a thought or 5 words that he was going to talk about was really helpful to him. And I thought, yeah, that's how my brain thinks too. He also mentioned verbal processing, that sometimes things can make more sense to us. That can be our lead domino where we can say, okay, it makes sense now. I can wrap my head around this. I'm going to go through it. Even though each step might take a little bit of effort, we have that confidence, we have that clarity. And he said verbal processing helps him. Sometimes he would just get out his audio recorder and just say what he was going to do. And I thought that's kind of cool because you could do that while you're driving. I'm all for multitasking and not having to sit down to do something. But for me, I thought talking to a friend or explaining to somebody, even my husband, if he's home and I thought I understood how to do something and I start explaining it to him or telling him what I'm going to do, I start to realize that I don't really understand everything. And I'm cementing in what I do know. I'm recognizing what I don't know, which also happens when I open up a Google Doc and start writing things down. So whatever it is that's really overwhelming to you, has lots of steps, has a system you don't understand, a process that you don't understand, whether it's a notebook, a Google Doc, I don't know that you do a PowerPoint kind of Google slide presentation, but whatever it is that helps you see. Some people write on multiple Post-it notes. My husband did that once and put them up on his mirror and he could see them. He could map it out that way. But any way that you need to do to help your brain have some clarity, it'll really help with the executive functioning because we're already at a disadvantage with executive functioning. And it's already hard for people who are neurotypical to spend very much of your day with that executive function part. That's why we function better if we're doing that 10 to 20% of the day. But if you've ever started a new job or tried to learn a lot of new things at once, you might feel like, oh my goodness, I'm maxing out because we're probably doing it more than 10 or 20% of the day. And we do a lot better when a lot of it's automated. So anything that you can do to make that first domino, set it up so that all you have to do is touch it and it will go more smoothly because you've planned it out in a way that works for your brain. And different people have different ways of doing that. We probably are more alike than most people. But I don't know if that works for you to see it written down, to write it out, to say it out, to talk it out. But it could be helpful. I want to dive into all this memory stuff more, the short term, the long term, what we pay attention to, what we can't pay attention to. It's all so fascinating. It's all connected with our patterns in life with ADHD, what you pay attention to, what you don't when you trip, fall, drop things, break things. I don't know if that's part of your ADHD. It definitely is. But I can only cover so much at a time without feeling like it's a lot of information. It's a lot of information. I don't want to go in too many directions. So hopefully this hasn't maxed you out today. Or maybe you're relating to it, but you can only take it in small sips. You know, it's like hot chocolate when it's really hot. You got to take a little bit and then kind of wait and have a little bit, let it cool down. But like I did with that 10-minute video yesterday, it took me 30 minutes maybe, but I learned so much because I took it in ways at a pace that worked for me and took each thing that I learned and wrote it out and made sure it made sense before I went to the next part. I knew I'd forget, even though it connected with me and it made me think, oh my goodness, yes. I still needed to write it out so I wouldn't forget. And I still needed to write a sentence or something that related to it so I could remember how it related to me and how I could use it. So any method that you need, use it. If you've seen, well, I've had success with this before when I was in college or at this job or trying to function in any way that you need to. We all have to, like it or not. But thanks so much for being here. Happy Halloween. If you're listening today, you're probably busy today. It's Halloween, but I appreciate you being here. And tell a friend or two or relative or someone about my podcast. That would be my favor I ask of you today so that more people can listen. We can gather a community of amazing women who have the challenges and craziness that we have. We have joy too, but it can be challenging for sure. So thanks so much for being here. I'll be back. Bye.
Open windows, broken shadows. Frozen dreams are left for tomorrow. Without a cause, no time for a pause. The silence of sound has yet been found, but not by me.